Chosen one. Before you scroll away, before you convince yourself that this message is for someone else, I need you to stop for a moment and listen carefully. Because what you are about to hear is not a coincidence. You did not find this message by accident. You did not click on this video by chance. And the reason I know that is because God has a way of placing a message directly in front of the people who need it most. For a long time, you have been asking questions that nobody could answer. Why has life been so difficult? Why do you keep facing delays when others seem to move forward so easily? Why have people misunderstood you? Why have doors closed in your face after you prayed so hard for them to open? Why did people walk away when you needed them the most? And perhaps the deepest question of all, why has God remained silent? You may not realize it yet, but the answer to all of those questions is connected. Because what felt like rejection was actually a test. What felt like abandonment was actually a test. What felt like silence was actually a test. And what shocked everyone was not the fact that you were being tested, it was the way you responded. You see, there were people who thought they knew how your story would end. They looked at your struggles and assumed you would eventually give up. They looked at your pain and assumed you would become bitter. They looked at your disappointments and assumed your faith would disappear. They looked at your delays and assumed your hope would die. But they underestimated something. They underestimated what God had placed inside you. Because even when you were exhausted, you kept going. Even when your heart was breaking, you kept believing. Even when your prayers seemed unanswered, you kept trusting. And heaven noticed every single moment. There were nights when nobody saw your tears. Nobody saw you sitting alone, wondering if things would ever change. Nobody saw you fighting silent battles inside your mind. Nobody saw the weight you carried every day. People saw your smile. People saw your strength. People saw your calm exterior. But they never saw the storm raging inside your soul. Only God saw that. Only God knew how hard it was. Only God knew how many times you almost gave up. Only God knew how many times you felt like quitting. And yet, you didn't. That is why this message is so important. Because there is something God wants you to understand. The struggle was never the story. The test was, you have been focused on the pain, but heaven has been focused on your response. Think about that for a moment. While you were wondering when the situation would change, God was watching how you handled the situation. While you were praying for the storm to end, God was developing strength inside you. While you were asking for answers, God was building character, and that changes everything. Because now you can begin to see your journey through a different lens. You can begin to understand that the delays were not wasted. The tears were not wasted. The heartbreak was not wasted. The waiting was not wasted. Nothing was wasted. Every challenge served a purpose. Every obstacle carried a lesson. Every disappointment prepared you for something greater. But here's where the story becomes even more powerful. Because there came a moment when the test became harder, much harder. Not because life became more difficult, but because the silence became deeper. You prayed. Nothing happened. You waited. Nothing changed. You hoped. Nothing moved. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. Months turned into years. And somewhere along the way, a dangerous thought tried to enter your mind. Maybe God has forgotten me. Maybe my prayers don't matter. Maybe nothing is ever going to change. Maybe I'm not as special as I thought. Maybe I should stop believing. Maybe I should stop hoping. Maybe I should stop trying. And that moment, that exact moment, was part of the test. Because the real test is never whether you can trust God when everything is working. The real test is whether you can trust God when nothing makes sense. Anyone can have faith after the miracle. Very few people have faith before it. Anyone can believe after the breakthrough. Very few people believe before it arrives. Anyone can praise God after the victory. Very few people praise Him while the battle is still raging. And that is what makes a chosen one different. A chosen one continues walking even when the path disappears. A chosen one continues trusting even when answers are delayed. A chosen one Continues believing even when circumstances suggest otherwise. Not because they are perfect, not because they are fearless, not because they never struggle, but because something deep within them refuses to let go, and that something inside you has carried you further than you realize. Think back to who you were a few years ago. Think back to the person you used to be. You have changed, you have grown, you have become stronger. The things that once broke you no longer have the same power over you. The people who once controlled your emotions no longer control your peace. The fears that once dominated your thinking no longer dominate your spirit. Why? Because every battle transformed you, every challenge refined you, every struggle strengthened you. You didn't just survive the storm, you became someone new because of it. And this is where many people get confused, because they assume God's greatest blessing is something external. More money, more success, more opportunities, more recognition, more influence. But often God's greatest blessing is internal. Wisdom, discernment, peace, strength, faith, character. The things that cannot be taken away. The things that remain even when circumstances change. And over the last season of your life, God has been depositing those treasures inside you, little by little, day by day, moment by moment, even when you couldn't see it, even when you didn't feel it, even when you doubted it. The transformation was happening, and there is something else you need to know. The people who hurt you unknowingly helped prepare you. I know that sounds strange, but it's true. The betrayal taught you discernment. The rejection taught you self-worth. The disappointment taught you resilience. The loneliness taught you dependence on God. The criticism taught you confidence. The delays taught you patience. The setbacks taught you endurance. Every painful experience carried a hidden lesson. Every wound carried hidden wisdom. Every battle carried hidden strength. And one day you will look back and realize that the very things you wished had never happened were the things God used to shape your destiny. But perhaps the hardest lesson of all was learning how to wait, because waiting feels like doing nothing. Waiting feels uncomfortable. Waiting feels frustrating. Waiting feels unfair. Yet waiting is often where the deepest growth happens, because waiting reveals what is truly inside your heart. Waiting exposes fear. Waiting exposes doubt. Waiting exposes insecurity. But waiting also builds trust. Waiting builds patience. Waiting builds endurance. Waiting builds spiritual maturity and chosen one. You have waited longer than most people realize. You have carried burdens nobody knows about. You have fought battles nobody understands. You have survived seasons that would have broken other people. And through it all, you continued moving forward. Not perfectly, not without mistakes, not without moments of weakness. But you kept moving, and that matters more than you know, because heaven does not expect perfection. Heaven honors perseverance. God does not expect you to never struggle. He expects you to keep coming back to Him, and that's exactly what you did. Every time life knocked you down, you got back up. Every time disappointment hit you, you found a way to continue. Every time fear whispered lies into your mind, you searched for truth. Every time darkness surrounded you, you looked for light. That response shocked everyone, because they expected you to quit. They expected you to become angry. They expected you to become bitter. They expected you to become cynical. But instead, you became stronger. You became wiser. You became deeper. You became closer to God. And now something is shifting. Maybe you can feel it. Maybe you can't explain it. But something is changing. The season you've been living in is not the season you're entering. The chapter you've been reading is not the chapter that's coming next. Because God never tests someone without purpose, and He never prepares someone without a promise. Right now, things may still look uncertain. You may still have unanswered questions. You may still have unresolved situations. You may still be waiting for breakthroughs. But don't confuse a delayed answer with a denied answer. Don't confuse silence with absence. Don't confuse waiting with failure. Because God is often working most powerfully when you see the least evidence of movement. Just because you can't see the roots growing doesn't mean the tree is dead. Just because you can't see the preparation doesn't mean the blessing isn't coming. Just because you can't see the answer doesn't mean heaven isn't moving. Something is happening behind the scenes. Something bigger than you realize. Something greater than you can currently imagine. And in the next season of your life, many things are going to make sense. Not all at once. Not overnight. But piece by piece. Moment by moment. Revelation by revelation. You will begin connecting the dots. You will begin understanding why certain doors had to close. You will begin understanding why certain people had to leave. You will begin understanding why certain opportunities disappeared. You will begin understanding why the timing felt so strange. Because what looked like rejection was often protection. What looked like delay was often preparation. And what looked like loss was often redirection. Chosen one. The story is not over. The test is not the ending. The struggle is not the conclusion. You are standing in the middle of a chapter, not at the end of the book. And the reason heaven is reminding you of. And when that revelation arrives, everything changes, because chosen one, what you thought was the end of your struggle was actually the beginning of your awakening. You are about to understand something deeper than motivation, deeper than emotion, deeper than anything you have ever heard before. There is a reason certain. People could never truly understand your journey. There is a reason you often felt alone even in a crowd. There is a reason your silence carried more pain than words could ever express. Because while you were living your life, something else was happening in the background. A divine test was unfolding. And the most powerful part is this. You were passing it without even realizing it. Every time you chose patience instead of revenge. You passed every time you chose prayer instead of panic. You passed every time you chose silence instead of chaos. You passed every time you chose faith instead of fear. You passed again. And that is why the energy around your life is starting to shift now, because heaven never ignores a tested heart. But before the blessing appears in the physical world, something must first be revealed in the spiritual world. And this is where things become intense, because not everyone around you was part of your journey for good reasons. Some people were assigned to your life as part of the test, yes. The same people you cried over, the same people you trusted, the same people you gave your loyalty to. Some of them were unknowingly part of the process that shaped your strength, not because they were right, but because they were necessary. And this is the part your heart may resist at first. But your soul already knows it is true, because if they had not hurt you, you would not have discovered your strength. If they had not left, you would not have discovered your independence. If they had not betrayed you, you would not have learned discernment. If everything had stayed comfortable, you would have never grown into who you are becoming now. And now, chosen one, something inside you is different. You no longer break the same way. You no longer trust blindly. You no longer beg people to stay. You no longer chase what is meant to leave. That is not pain anymore. That is growth. That is maturity born from fire. That is strength born from silence. That is wisdom born from suffering. But here is what makes your story even more powerful. While people thought you were losing, you were actually being built. While they assumed you were stuck, you were actually being upgraded. While they believed nothing was happening in your life, heaven was restructuring your entire destiny, and you did not even see it, because divine work is often invisible at first. Roots grow underground before they ever show fruit above the surface, and your life has been in that hidden stage where nothing looks impressive, but everything important is forming. Now listen carefully, chosen one, because this is where the test reaches its deepest point. There was a moment in your journey when you almost changed, not physically, but emotionally. There was a moment when you almost became bitter, almost stopped trusting, almost stopped praying with sincerity, almost stopped believing that things would ever get better. And that moment, that exact moment, was the final stage of the test, because anyone can stay faithful when life is easy, but very few people remain soft-hearted after repeated pain. Very few people remain kind after betrayal. Very few people remain hopeful after disappointment. Very few people remain connected to God after silence, and yet, you did, even when your heart was tired. You still prayed even when your emotions were heavy. You still hoped, even when your mind said, give up. Something deeper inside you said, keep going, and that something is what God was watching all along. Not your perfection, but your persistence, not your strength, but your surrender, not your performance, but your endurance, and because of that, you are not the same person anymore. You are entering a level of life that requires the version of you that survived the fire. But now I need you to understand something very carefully. Because this is where your spirit must be, strong. The shift that is coming is not just emotional, it is spiritual. And spiritual shifts often feel uncomfortable before they feel peaceful, because when God elevates you, He also separates you. Not everyone can go where you are going. Not everyone can understand what you are becoming. Not everyone can handle your next chapter. And that is why some connections in your life started fading naturally, not because you failed, but because your season changed. Now listen closely. Because there is something happening behind the scenes right now. Situations that once looked permanent are starting to lose their grip. Confusions that once controlled your mind are starting to clear. Heavy emotions that once overwhelmed you are slowly loosening. This is not random. This is alignment. But here is the most powerful truth in this entire message. God never wastes pain, not a single tear, not a single betrayal, not a single delay, not a single lonely night. Everything was recorded. Everything was counted. Everything had meaning. And now that the test is almost complete, something must be revealed. Chosen one. The reason you were tested so deeply is because your destiny is not ordinary. Ordinary people do not go through this level of refinement. Ordinary paths do not require this level of endurance. Ordinary lives do not demand this level of faith. You are being prepared for something that requires emotional strength, spiritual maturity, and unshakable trust. And now that preparation is complete, you are stepping into recognition, not just from people, but from life itself. Doors will begin to respond differently. Opportunities will begin to appear unexpectedly. Connections will begin to align naturally. Things that were once difficult will begin to flow, not because life suddenly became easy, but because you became ready, and readiness changes everything. But before that happens, one final thing must settle inside your heart. You must stop questioning the process. Because the moment you stop resisting the journey, you start receiving the reward. And the reward is not just external success. It is inner peace. It is clarity. It is stability. It is the feeling of finally understanding why everything had to happen the way it did. And when that peace arrives, you will realize something very powerful. You were never abandoned. You were being prepared. You were never forgotten. You were being watched. You were never breaking. You were being built. And chosen one. The next part of your story is going to prove everything you once doubted, because what God is about to reveal next will not just change your circumstances, it will change how you see your entire life. Because what God is about to reveal next will not just change your circumstances, it will change how you see your entire life. And chosen one, this is where everything you endured finally starts making sense. Not emotionally, not partially, but completely. There comes a moment in every chosen one's journey where silence breaks, not with noise, but with understanding, where confusion dissolves, not because everything changes instantly, but because you finally see what was happening behind it all, and that moment is now approaching your life quietly, but powerfully, because what you thought was delay was actually divine timing being perfectly aligned. What you thought was rejection was actually protection from something you were not ready to handle, and what you thought was abandonment was actually God positioning you away from what could have destroyed your destiny. You see, chosen one, not every open door is meant for you. Not every opportunity is safe for your future. Not every person who enters your life is meant to stay. And not every closed door is punishment. Some closed doors are salvation in disguise, but you only understand that after time reveals truth, and now truth is beginning to surface in your life. People are starting to show their real intentions. Situations are starting to reveal hidden meanings, and your inner awareness is becoming sharper than ever before. That is not coincidence. That is elevation. Because When God is preparing to bless a person, He first clears their vision. He removes confusion. He removes illusions. He removes attachments that no longer serve their purpose. And in that clearing process, it often feels like loss, but in reality, it is alignment. Now listen carefully, chosen one, because this is where your story takes a powerful turn. There was a time when you thought your prayers were going unanswered, but in reality, every single prayer was being answered in ways you could not see yet. Some answers were yes, some answers were not yet, and some answers were, I am protecting you from this. But you only noticed the silence, not the protection. You only felt the delay, not the preparation. You only saw the absence, not the divine intervention. And that is why your faith was being tested, not to break you, but to mature you, because immature faith collapses under pressure, but refined faith becomes unshakable under pressure, and that is what you are becoming. Now, chosen one, there is something deeper happening right now in your life. You may not fully understand it yet, but your spirit feels it, that quiet feeling that something is changing, that inner sense that your season is not the same anymore, that subtle awareness that old cycles are closing. That is not imagination, that is transition, because God does not announce new seasons loudly. He shifts them quietly until one day you realize you are no longer where you used to be, and you no longer react the same way, and you no longer feel the same heaviness. And that is where your transformation becomes undeniable. But here is where the emotional weight of your journey becomes even more meaningful. Because while you were being tested, you were also being observed not just by God, but by life itself. There are people who underestimated you, people who assumed you would not rise again, people who thought your story was over, people who believed your silence meant weakness, but they did not understand something crucial. Your silence was not defeat. Your silence was depth. Your silence was reflection. Your silence was preparation. And now, that silence is about to be replaced with results. Not loud revenge, not emotional reaction, but undeniable transformation. The kind that speaks without words. The kind that requires no explanation. The kind that makes people question how you became who you are becoming, because very soon, chosen one, people will start noticing something different about you, not just externally, but energetically. The way you speak will carry calm authority. The way you move will carry quiet confidence. The way you think will carry clarity. And the way you respond to life will carry peace. And those who once misunderstood you will begin to wonder what changed. But the truth is, nothing outside you changed first. Everything inside you changed first. And that is why your external life is now beginning to shift, because life always responds to inner transformation. Now, chosen one, we are approaching the most important realization of this entire message. The reason your test felt so intense is because your destiny carries weight. Not everyone is given this level of preparation. Not everyone is shaped through this level of silence. Not everyone is refined through this level of emotional pressure. But those who are chosen are prepared differently, because what is coming into your life next requires stability. It requires maturity. It requires faith that does not collapse under pressure, and you have been built for that, even when you doubted it, even when you questioned it, even when you felt like you were falling behind. God was building you into someone who can carry what is coming next. And now, the shift is becoming visible. Doors are beginning to align. Situations are beginning to resolve. Paths are beginning to open. Not all at once, but step by step. Because God never overwhelms His chosen ones with sudden change. He transitions them gradually, so they can recognize Him in every step of the journey. And chosen one, this is your stepping moment. You are no longer in preparation alone. You are entering manifestation. But before manifestation fully unfolds, there is one final test that always appears, and that test is doubt. The question of whether what God promised will actually happen. The question of whether all of this has meaning. The question of whether your waiting was worth it. And chosen one, this is where your faith must remain steady. Because right before breakthrough, doubt becomes loud, but clarity is already on its way, and when it arrives, everything you suffered through will start to connect, like a divine puzzle finally coming together. You will understand why certain people left. You will understand why certain doors closed. You will understand why certain prayers were delayed, and you will realize nothing was random, everything was orchestrated, and that realization will change your entire perspective forever. Because the moment you understand the process, you stop resenting the past and you start honoring it and chosen one. That is where your true breakthrough begins, not just in life, but in understanding. And when understanding meets faith, miracles become natural. And this is exactly where your story is heading.